Welcome to the third and final part of my discussion with Caroline Hardaker. In parts 1 and 2, we discussed her second novel, Mothtown. If you haven't watched or listened to those, I suggest you do that first. In this section, Caroline gives her recommendations for books that are similar in some ways to Mothtown, particularly in the sense that they are genre bending, kind of difficult to classify. She's got some great recommendations coming up, so please stay listening. And if you enjoy this kind of content, please consider subscribing to the channel. Hope you enjoyed the last part of our discussion. Welcome to the third part of my discussion with Caroline Hardaker about her novel Mothtown. If you haven't watched or listened to parts 1 or 2, please check those out first. In this third section, we're going to hear Caroline's recommendations for similar or related texts. I have no idea what you got up your sleeve, so fire away.
So basically, when I was having a think about this, I basically just thought, I'm going to recommend books I really like. And
That's a good way to go about it.
they've all got similarities, though. So kind of similar to Mothtown, they are genre bending. They're all literary, but they all cross over a little bit into maybe a little bit of fantasy, a little bit of sci-fi, a little bit of horror. And to a degree, they're all a bit of an exploration of the inner selves, so mental health, the same themes that we've discussed today. And in terms of style, they all have what I really love to read and love to write is a tone which is like gentle, character-led, kind of hypnotic, almost lullaby-esque in some degrees. I'm a really big fan of like poetic prose. I mean, I'm a poet, so I probably would be. But I just, when I read, I kind of want to be piecing together things, and I want to unpack beautiful sentences. And I think poetry is a great way of describing an everyday thing in a completely new light. And I think that's what stories should do for us. So all of my recommendations, there's only a few, but they all do that in my mind, but are quite accessible at the same time. So the first one I wanted to say, I think it came out last summer. It's called Shark Heart, by Emily Habeck.
Shark as in
shark. Hard.
Right, okay.
I know, and I mean, when you describe it, it sounds bizarre, but it is beautiful. So the premise of the novel is it's written in a very snippet kind of way. There's little bits of poetry, little bits of prose, very short chapters, incredibly readable. And the premise of this is a world where people come down with diseases where they turn into an animal. And this is about a couple in which the man finds out he has this genetic disease that turns him into a great white shark. It is a metaphor for disability, the difficulties in a relationship during these situations. But it is wonderful, and it really made me interested in sharks as well. But I think it's done really well as a novel in itself. I think last week or very recently it's shortlisted for a Kitchies, I think, as well, which is the Blackwell's prize for sort of experimental, thought-provoking, speculative literature. So it's done very well. So that's my first recommendation. I always try and fit that in somewhere because it's so good. Similarly, the work of Julia Armfield. So Our Wives Under the Sea as potentially her most famous one. She writes similarly in a lovely, lilting, poetic, understated way. Even though it's poetic, it's definitely not what we class as purple prose, like overwritten. It's very clipped and beautiful. But again, it's about very small things in a way. It's about relationships and how people relate to each other in strange circumstances. And that one follows a couple in which one of them has just returned from an undersea mission because she's a marine biologist.
Mm.
And she was meant to come back after 3 weeks, but it took a couple of years, and she's changed. She's herself, but she's different. And
Mm.
again, you could read into this as being difficulties and distance between
Mm.
people and how people change, but there is more of a surreal element to that.
Mm.
I would recommend also, I've very much been recently into the work of an author called Megan Hunter, sorry.
Mm.
She's written a few slightly more dystopian pieces. The End We Start From, I think, was turned into a film a couple of years ago,
Mm.
but it was The Harpy, which again is a look at a very intimate relationship between a couple and how her interior world twists a thing he has done into a fantastical way, and it does involve a harpy. So
Mm.
I very much recommend that one
Mm.
also. I also want to give a massive shout out, because I always do, for the work of Aaliyah Whiteley. So she's a UK author, quite prolific now.
Mm.
She writes very speculative literary work, a little bit sometimes more science fiction than mine.
Mm.
But there's one particular novel of hers called The Beauty, which I've discussed before when I did a panel with some philosophy professors,
Mm.
because we were discussing novels as thought experiments and
Mm.
perceptions of beauty.
Okay.
And her novel is set in the near future where women don't exist anymore until they start spraying from the ground and they kind of
Oh.
look like mushrooms. So it's a kind of look at what is beauty,
Mm.
and when we're the key element of it is storytelling. So when
Mm.
we're telling stories about this fabled past, how does that relate to a reality which is brand new?
Mm.
It's beautiful though, and very weird, as most of these books are.
Mm.
The final one, maybe I might have two more actually, if I'm allowed two
You
more,
can have
because I've
two.
said quite
Absolutely.
a lot.
Yep.
So it's quite a famous one. It's not very recent. The Memory Police, Yoko Agawa.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Again, that's probably the most famous
Mm.
recommendation I have, but that is a real look at memory, not just through the perception of how the story is told, but literally memories. People find they wake up and they've forgotten things, and it's how
Mm.
people cope with that.
Mm.
It's incredibly hypnotic.
Mm.
It's like most of my favorite books, it's quite a short read. I'm quite a fan of a clipped little novel, which is
Mm.
very tight. Um, and I find that The Memory Police fits that very well.
Mm.
Um, I'll give one more
Yeah.
before I go off on a complete tangent. And it was another one I read last year, I think. I got an advanced copy. Book called Chlorine, by Jade Song.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of similarities to Mothtown in this
Mm-hmm.
one, in terms of it's about someone who, though isn't quite as isolated as David is,
Mm.
but doesn't feel like their current form fits
Mm.
their self.
Yeah.
And this is a woman or a girl who is a very good competitive swimmer.
Mm.
And the end heads towards her transformation
Mm.
into a creature which isn't quite human.
Mm.
But it's quite mesmerizing. It's
Mm.
poetic. It really does carry you forward. And yeah, it's one that you think about afterwards. I'm very much into books that stay with you
Oh,
afterwards.
absolutely. When it does something and
Yeah,
you're not sure in particular what it was, and you're like,
yeah.
yeah. Mm.
I sort of I appreciate novels which are plot novels, and I know plenty of people who read books because they want a page turning, who
Mm.
done it sort of thing.
Mm.
But my motivation when I'm reading or writing, I think, is to create something that stays with you afterwards and has maybe changed your opinion of something, or has twisted your opinion, or made you think about an aspect of yourself.
Mm.
That's the most important thing to me. And all of those recommendations do, because they're all, even though they appear quite surreal and a bit weird,
Mm.
they're all about people. They've got people, real people at their heart,
Mm.
and you can see yourself in them. And I think
Yeah.
that's special.
Yeah. Well,
I think I'll
thank you.
stop there.
Fascinating recommendations. I hadn't heard of most of those at all. So good list for me as well.
Good,
So
good.
brilliant. Thank you so much. And yeah, thank you for coming on the podcast. Brilliant to have you here. And final question, have you got anything, other projects lined up?
Yes, many of them. Um, some of them I can talk about and some of them I can't talk about.
Mm.
So which ones can I talk about? That's a good question. So I won't talk about any of them actually, just in case, but there's a mix. So there's at least one novel in the
Mm.
works, but also branched out a little bit into graphic novels due to
Okay.
what I said before.
Mm.
So it's not probably what people would think of as graphic novels, but
Mm.
it's more graphic poetry, I guess. But also there's hopefully more music projects in the works too, because I've done libretto
Mm.
for opera in the past. So I feel like at the moment there's an awful lot, but it's all in the
You've got
mix. So I
two young
can't say
children.
too
How are
much.
you doing
But
this?
hopefully next year I can just go blah and then it'll all just come out and I'll be able to talk about it more. But
Okay.
yeah.
Well, I'll link to
So
your
lots.
website as well so people
Thank
can
you.
keep up with you that way. Yes, between libretto,
Yeah, thank you.
poetry, and graphic novels and all sorts. Yeah. Well, thanks again for coming on. It's
Thanks.
been great having you. And yeah, good luck with all those projects and looking forward to them coming out.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank you.